The spread of COVID-19 led to many, if not all, theatres having to close their doors. Since March 2020, and depending on what country you're in, this has either been a constant or it's been an off-again, on-again relationship. Since the beginning of theatre, though, since its creation, it's seen its fair share of tough spots. And what always shines through these horrible situations is the people who quietly work on in the background and do what they can with what they have, and those who shout the loudest. Unfortunately, the noise created by the latter sometimes drowns out the passion, hard work and dedication of the former. I'm Dahi Digata. This is the first ever episode of 9 to 5 Theatre, and today we're talking about theatre versus COVID. Before I continue in this video, it's very important for me to stress that most of what I'm talking about in this video is through my own perspective and my own experiences. I do not want to or wish to speak on behalf of any different tiers in the theatre community. I'm really just commenting on my observations. It's been tough for all of us. It doesn't matter where you are in this industry, what level you are, if you're amateur, if you're community, if you're professional, if you're A-list, if you're down at Z, you have more than likely been affected by this. Okay, let's continue. The theatre has undergone a landslide of atrocities and things that could leave it eradicated in its 3,000 plus year history. And yet for some reason every generation in recent times seems to undergo the same existential fear and crisis, which is the idea that the theatre is dying. But if the theatre is dying, it's not because its doors are going to be closed during a pandemic. In fact, it's kind of arrogant to think otherwise. The theatre has survived thousands of years of invasions, wars, the radio, television, and film industry, old gods, aristocracy, corruption, greed, oppressive ideologies, famine and diseases, the Black Death, more famine and more diseases, new gods, divas and drama queens. Every single new and old artistic movement to date, the theatre has survived, but more importantly, it has survived itself. And this is a consistent fact that we don't hear enough during these tough spots, especially during COVID. The theatre is going to be fine. The institution of theatre is going to survive with or without COVID, and unfortunately with or without you and me. If history has taught us anything so far, it's that the theatre and the theatre community is incredibly amazing at overcoming its obstacles and its struggles. And I think it's safe to say that the most beautiful theatre pieces, and sometimes most beautiful art, comes from places of struggle, whether that be personal or professional or whatever. On a personal note, I prefer working in theatres that have limited resources, because it forces your imagination to work that much harder, and it has the same effect on the audience and the cast. And let's be honest, in this industry it's a lot more, not beneficial, but it's a lot more rewarding to create something out of nothing than it is to create something out of everything, like a massive budget. Without struggle, we are pointless. And if you think about it, if our lives were void of any kind of struggle or hardship, we'd have no stories to tell. Life would be boring, and if we have no stories to tell, well, we've kind of made theatre itself irrelevant. Life is struggle. Struggle conjures art. Art gives us purpose. With all that in mind, I didn't understand why there weren't more theatre companies embracing COVID for what it was embracing its restrictions and embracing its limitations, and leading the theatre into new realms of expression with new and old mediums like virtual theatre, radio dramas, podcast theatre, rising above our limitations and accommodating them into our performances to create a new experience is what the theatre does best. And I know there were a lot of theatre companies and organisations that did just that. They were continuing to do that. But there was still so much retaliation that hard work and dedication was just lost in that noise. These restrictions and limitations should be embraced by the entire theatre community. Not just to send the message that, hey, we're going to be fine, we'll get through this, but also because it's what we do. We are no stranger to hardship. We're no stranger to a challenge. We're used to working 15 hours a day. We're used to not getting paid correctly. We're used to working for free. We're used to just pulling up our socks and just plowing through regardless of what anyone says or does. We are used to being underappreciated. COVID-19? Just throw it on the fucking pile, man. And I do not believe for 1 second that this is a simple case of the straw that broke the camel's back. Our camel's back has been mush for a very long time. Unfortunately, what we mostly got through the media from our peers was this outrage of how appalling it was that we had to close our doors, how unfair it was, how unjustified. Yet still hitting people with the idea that we're extremely important to society, and that led me to the heartbreaking question: are we? The worst part about this pandemic has been, and still is, the light it has cast on our biggest fears. Personally, I have had an uneasy feeling in regards to this for a number of years now, but I never knew what it was up until COVID-19. I couldn't understand why there was so much retaliation this time with this new thing that we had to overcome. We have always faced obstacles, so why was COVID so different? It's because it struck a nerve. The word essential is now in our vocabulary in a much more specific and exact sort of way. And I think subconsciously it has forced us to see that in the grand scheme of things, we're not as essential as we once thought we were. As theatre people, we generally have to combat or deal with our role in society. Every time we talk to somebody with a real job about what it is we do, we become ever more aware of this unsettling feeling. And often because of these wretched conversations with outsiders of the theatre community, we're left feeling like we aren't important, we aren't significant, we aren't essential. Now, is all this to say that we don't benefit society? Is it to say that we don't contribute to the world in some way? No, absolutely not. But being honest with ourselves, if the theatres were to never reopen, if live drama was never to be performed again, would society miss us? Would they demand our return? Would they even notice that we're gone? Or would it continue on and be just fine without us? I think we know now, on some level. Whether we accept it or not, it still stings. Society has blatantly told us that it will be fine without us and it doesn't need us right now. I know it's very bleak to look at it this way. We're still great, we're still beautiful, we still benefit society, but if anything, during this pandemic, society has told us that we are not essential to it anymore, at least not in the ways we used to be. don't worry, it's not exactly a negative. To know and to be aware of this now during a lockdown is a great place to be in, because now we can work on it, we can address it, we can become essential again. Because, as we previously mentioned, we are fantastic at overcoming and adapting our obstacles into what we do. So what does theatre do for society? At the beginning of this lockdown, I made a promise to myself that I would still treat this like it was my 9-to-5 job. And with that, I just scoured through my old practitioner books. I read as many plays as I could, and I reread all my old theatre journals. And when I did that, I came across a quote that I haven't read in years. And it's a quote by former president and playwright of Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel. And I'm going to read it to you now. I do not think that the theatre is dwindling in its importance. Rather, it is better suited than the electronic media to reveal the light and dark forces of present-day existence. Theatre is not just another genre, it is one among many, but it is the only genre in which human beings address and speak to other human beings. Theatre is a point at which the intellectual and spiritual life of the human community crystallizes. It is a space where we can exercise its freedoms and then come to understand them. There was a time when the theatre gave more to society than it does today. But what Václav Havel points out in that quote is the theatre's unique contribution to society and its irreplaceability. What really matters now is that the institution of the theatre survives. And in order to do that, we have to leave the drama at the door and understand and know exactly what it is we give to the world, what we give to society, what we give to our communities, and what we give to our audiences. What we consistently do is overcome and even use our limitations, restrictions, and oppressions into our theatrical discipline. 3,000 years of chaos and beauty, and now COVID-19. There is no doubt in my mind that the theatre will be back up on its feet before we know it, and we'll be fine, and we'll be prospering again. And who knows, maybe there's a silver lining to all this. Perhaps there's hundreds of thousands of people out there that have been locked up in their house for so long that they're dying to get out and try new things, and perhaps a night at the theatre is the first thing on their list now. We are going to be fine. Just throw it on the pile, pull up your socks, and read a play. Speaking of which, every second episode of Theatre 9 to 5, or 9 to 5 Theatre, I keep doing that, 9 to 5 Theatre, you'll be given a play on the topical episodes, and then I'll discuss it in the second episode of the month. So your first assigned play is in the public domain, so don't worry about it. It is by Oscar Wilde, and it is called Vera or the Nihilists. It was Oscar Wilde's first play, and it was his biggest failure. However, I think over time it has ripened, and I am dying to do this play. It's fantastic. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. See you in 2 weeks' time. This is going to be the thing I hate the most about this. So hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. Yeah. I have a Patreon account. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Do we have a Twitter? We have a Twitter. Yeah, do that.